Hey guys, tonight we're stepping back into a world where the horizon wasn't just a line. It was a promise that something enormous might be watching you from beyond it. We're going into the hidden corners of history, where giants weren't just stories your grandmother whispered. They were your neighbours, your enemies, your gods. Drop your city and local time in the comments below. I love seeing where this story reaches you. Now dim the lights, maybe grab a warm drink, and let's walk together into the morning mist of a world that was never quite meant for people like us. You wake up as the sun barely kisses the edge of the valley. The ground beneath your sleeping furs vibrates, not from an earthquake, but from footsteps. Each step sounds like a tree falling in the distance. Your heart hammers against your ribs as you press your face to the cold earth and listen. Thud, thud, thud. The rhythm is steady, deliberate. You know this pattern. It's Gorvak, the last giant of the northern mountains, making his morning rounds. He's checking the boundary stones, the ancient markers that separate his territory from yours. The stones your great-grandfather's great-grandfather placed there after the Treaty of Bent Spears. You taste copper in your mouth, fear mixed with something else. Respect, maybe. Or that particular flavour of dread that comes from knowing you're sharing the world with something that could step on your entire village like you'd step on an anthill. The footsteps grow closer. Through the morning fog you catch a glimpse of him. 27 feet of weathered skin and muscle, moving with the careful grace of someone who's learned to be gentle in a world made of matchsticks. His beard, white as winter clouds, drags along the ground as he walks. Each strand is thick as your arm. You watch him bend down near the old oak, the one your people call the talking tree. But when Gorvak approaches it, the tree barely reaches his waist. He places one massive hand against its trunk, and you hear something that makes your blood run cold. He's humming. The melody drifts across the valley like a lullaby made of loneliness. It's a song you've never heard, in a language that predates your oldest stories. The tune carries memories of when the world was different, when giants walked freely between mountains, when the sky seemed closer because beings tall enough to touch it still existed. You realize you're holding your breath. The sound of his voice, low as distant thunder, gentle as rainfall on leaves, reminds you that giants weren't always the monsters from your bedtime stories. They were just people, really, really big people who watched their world shrink around them. Gorvak finishes his song and straightens up. For a moment his eyes scan the valley where you're hiding. You freeze, knowing that those eyes have seen empires rise and fall, have watched your ancestors learn to walk upright, have counted every star in skies that your grandchildren will never see. But he doesn't spot you. Instead, he turns toward the eastern peaks, where the morning light is painting the snowcaps gold. His shoulders sag slightly, a gesture so human it breaks your heart. He's tired. Not physically tired, but soul-tired. The kind of exhaustion that comes from being the last of anything. You know his story because your grandfather told it to you, and his grandfather told it to him. Gorvak wasn't always alone. Once, he had a mate named Senna, who stood 23 feet tall and could sing birds out of the sky. They had children, 3 of them, each born smaller than their parents, as if the world itself was slowly squeezing the giant blood out of their lineage. The children grew up and left to find their own territories, but territories for giants were shrinking. Men were multiplying, building cities where once only forests stood. The giants found themselves pushed higher into mountains, deeper into caves, further from the world they'd known for millennia. Senna died during the winter of 7 storms, when the cold lasted so long that even giants couldn't stay warm. Gorvak buried her under a cairn of boulders, each stone the size of a house. You can still see it if you know where to look. A hill that seems too perfectly round, too deliberately placed. Now he walks alone, maintaining boundaries that matter less each year. Your people respect the markers, but you know others don't. Settlements creep closer annually. Hunters report finding massive footprints in places where no giant has walked in living memory. The truth hits you like ice water. You're watching history end. Not the grand, dramatic kind of ending that gets carved into stone monuments. The quiet kind. The kind where something magnificent simply fades away because the world forgot how to make room for magnificence. Gorvak's footsteps are moving away now, heading toward the morning shadows where the mountain slopes begin. Soon he'll disappear into caves that run deeper than your village's oldest wells, into spaces carved by beings who needed ceilings higher than your tallest buildings. You wait until the sound fades completely before standing up. Your legs shake, not from fear anymore, but from the weight of witnessing something that will never happen again. You've just seen the last giant's morning routine, and tomorrow there might be one less day left in the world for such things. As you walk back toward your village, you wonder what your children will think when you try to explain what giants were really like. Will they believe you when you tell them about Gorvek's gentle humming? About the way he touched trees like old friends? About the loneliness that radiated from him like heat from a forge? The morning mist is lifting and the world looks smaller somehow, more manageable, more human. But something essential is missing from the landscape. A sense of scale that made everything else seem possible. You're standing in what used to be called Giant's Rest, though the name appears on no modern maps. Your boots crunch on stones that seem too perfectly fitted, too impossibly large to have been placed by human hands. Each block weighs more than your entire house, yet they rest against each other with the precision of a master craftsman's jewellery. The morning sun angles through gaps in what remains of the walls, casting shadows that reveal the true scope of this place. You're not looking at ruins, you're standing inside a kitchen. The hearth alone could hold your entire family, with room left over for the neighbours. The ceiling, partially collapsed, still arches 40 feet above your head. You run your fingers along the edge of what might have been a table. The stone is worn smooth by countless years of use, polished to a shine that reflects your face like dark water. But it's the height that stops your breath. The surface comes up to your chest. For you, it's a wall. For them, it was furniture. Try to imagine preparing breakfast here. Your hands would barely reach the countertops. The cupboards, carved directly into the mountain face, stretch so high their tops disappear into shadows. There are handholds carved into the rock, footholds really, suggesting that even giants needed to climb to reach their highest shelves. The tools they left behind tell stories your history books never mentioned. A wooden spoon, carved from what must have been an entire tree trunk, lies forgotten in a corner. Its bowl could serve soup to 20 people. The handle shows wear marks from fingers thick as your forearm, smooth grooves where thumbs rested during countless meals. But it's the little details that break your heart. Scratches on the wall near the hearth, about 15 feet up, child height if you're a giant. Someone young once stood here, watching parents cook, carving idle marks into stone while waiting for dinner. The scratches form crude pictures, a sun, a bird, what might be a flower. Even giant children drew pictures on walls while their parents weren't looking. You discover a set of stairs carved into the living rock, each step nearly 3 feet high. Climbing them feels like mountaineering. Your thighs burn, your lungs work harder, and halfway up you understand why these beings moved with such deliberate grace. Every step for them was a decision. Every movement required consideration of weight, of space, of the smaller things that might be underfoot. At the top of the stairs, you find what can only be described as a bedroom. The sleeping platform, carved from a single piece of granite, stretches longer than most boats. Pillows made from gathered moss and animal hides, now ancient and crumbling, still maintain their shape. Someone slept here for centuries, leaving the impression of their body in stone that should have been too hard to yield. But the most incredible discovery waits near what used to be a window. The opening frames a view of the entire valley. Below, your village, the river, the forest where you hunt, the hills where your sheep graze, all of it spread out like a detailed map. Carved into the window frame are symbols, not random decorations but careful notations. Dates, you realise, marked in a system of notation that predates anything in your culture's memory. Beside each date, tiny carved figures. People, animals, weather patterns. Someone stood at this window for generations, keeping track of the small world below. They were watching you, all of you, your ancestors, your culture's development, your seasonal patterns. Giants weren't just living alongside humans, they were chronicling human history. The implications hit you like vertigo. Every harvest, every hard winter, every celebration in your village's square was noted by eyes 40 feet above ground. Births, deaths, marriages, wars, all recorded by beings who watched human lifespans flicker past like seasons. You find more records carved deeper into the stone, weather patterns spanning centuries, animal migration routes tracked across decades, even notations about which human families were thriving, which were struggling, which children showed promise as hunters or builders. But the entries stop abruptly. The final carved symbol shows a date from about 60 years ago, around the time your grandfather was born. After that, nothing. The window frame above is smooth, untouched by any carving tool. That's when you notice the other details. Dust patterns suggesting no one has disturbed these rooms in decades. Spiderwebs in corners that haven't been cleared away. The gradual encroachment of moss and small plants through cracks in the walls. This isn't an abandoned home. It's a monument to the end of observation. Someone stopped watching your world because there was no one left to watch with. The careful chronicle of human activity ended not because giants lost interest, but because giants lost each other. You imagine the final entries being carved by hands that shook with loneliness. The last keeper of records, maintaining habits that no longer served any purpose except to fill the empty hours, writing down observations that no one would ever read, continuing traditions that would die with them. Near the sleeping area, you discover something that makes your throat tight. A collection of smaller objects clearly crafted for beings much closer to your size. Wooden bowls that would fit in your hands, stone cups sized for human lips, simple tools carved with the same precision as giant implements, but scaled down with loving attention to detail. Gifts. A giant had been carving gifts for humans. The craftsmanship is extraordinary, better than anything your village's best artisans could produce. Each piece shows an understanding of human proportions, human needs, human aesthetics. Someone had spent considerable time studying your people, not as specimens, but as neighbours worthy of thoughtful presence. But the gifts were never delivered. They sit in neat rows, gathering dust, waiting for an occasion that never came. Perhaps their creator waited for the right moment, the right approach, the right way to bridge a gap that seemed too wide for friendship, but too narrow for indifference. As afternoon light slants through the ancient windows, you realise you're standing in more than ruins. You're inside evidence of the greatest tragedy in your world's hidden history. Not that giants existed, but that they cared about humans enough to watch over them, to worry about them, to carve gifts for them, and to die alone while humans never knew they were being loved from a distance. You're walking the old trade road that connects your village to the mountain passes, but something feels wrong with the ground beneath your feet. Every few steps you stumble slightly, as if the earth itself has a rhythm you can't quite match. The stones that pave this ancient pathway aren't laid in any pattern your people would recognise. Each stone is massive, not quite giant-sized, but close. They're fitted together with gaps that seem random until you start paying attention to their spacing. Then you realise these gaps are footsteps. Not human footsteps, but not quite giant-sized either. Something in between. You kneel down and trace the outline of what might have been a footprint pressed into stone centuries ago. It's twice the length of your own foot, but the proportions are eerily human. Toes that spread for balance, an arch that speaks of long journeys, a heel worn smooth by countless miles. The spacing between these stone footprints tells a story about the people who made this road. They moved with longer strides than humans, but shorter than true giants. They travelled in groups. You can make out at least 3 different foot sizes, suggesting adults and children walking together. Sometimes the prints cluster close, as if the group had stopped to rest or discuss something. Other times they spread out, indicating casual conversation while walking. This wasn't built by giants. It was built by something else. You follow the road as it winds toward the mountain, and the footprints become clearer, more intentional. Someone wanted these impressions preserved. Near a stream crossing, you find an entire family's worth of prints pressed deep into a flat stone surface, like a prehistoric family photo. The largest print belongs to someone about 8 feet tall. Beside it, a slightly smaller impression, perhaps 7.5 feet. Then 2 more, progressively smaller, the tiniest belonging to someone who might have stood 4 feet tall. A family, parents and children, travelling together, making sure their passage was remembered. But remembered by whom? And why? The answer comes as you crest a small hill and see the valley spread below you. Your village sits in the distance like a collection of toys, smoke rising from chimneys no bigger than your thumb from this height. But that's not. What makes you gasp? Carved into the hillside opposite your village, so large you've never noticed it from ground level, is a massive amphitheatre. Rows of stone seats arc around a central space, each seat sized for beings between 6 and 10 feet tall. The whole structure faces your village, as if your daily lives were the entertainment. You scramble down toward this hidden theatre, your pulse quickening with each step. The closer you get, the more details emerge. The seats aren't roughly hewn, they're carved with careful attention to comfort. Armrests at the right height for longer arms, footrests positioned for legs that needed more room, even cup holders carved into the stone, sized for vessels larger than anything your people make. But it's the stage that stops you cold. The central performance area is carved with intricate scenes that seem to move in the changing light. Figures of various sizes interact in what looks like a historical narrative, humans and giants working together, building structures, sharing meals, celebrating festivals. The carving style is sophisticated, showing understanding of perspective, motion, and emotion that rivals anything in your culture's greatest artworks. You climb onto the stage to examine the carvings more closely. One panel shows humans and giants constructing what looks like your village's oldest building, the grain storehouse that your people have always assumed was built by your ancestors. But in this carved version, giant hands guide human workers, lifting massive support beams into place while smaller figures handle the detail work. Another panel depicts a harvest festival. Humans dance while giants provide music with instruments sized for their larger hands. The expressions carved into the stone faces show genuine joy, community, celebration shared across the size divide. But the final panel tells a different story. The giants are leaving. Human figures reach toward them with pleading gestures, while the larger beings turn away, their carved faces showing sadness and resignation. In the background, smaller figures, the in-between people, like those who left footprints on the road, seem to be making a choice. Some follow the giants into the mountains, others remain with the humans in the valleys. You realize you're looking at a historical record that your own culture has completely forgotten. Giants didn't just disappear. There was a separation, a conscious decision to end a collaboration that had lasted generations, and some people who were neither fully human nor fully giant, had to choose sides. Sitting in one of the amphitheatre seats, you try to imagine what these performances might have been like. Beings of various sizes gathering to watch their shared history enacted on this stage, stories told in 3 dimensions, with actors who could literally embody the scale of the events they were portraying. But who was the audience? The seats suggest regular gatherings of mixed communities, some human, some giant, and many something in between. This wasn't just entertainment, it was cultural preservation, shared storytelling, community building across differences that seem impossible to bridge in your current world. The acoustics of the space are remarkable. Even your normal speaking voice carries clearly to the furthest seats. A giant's voice would have filled this space like thunder, while human voices would have carried like music. The design accounts for different vocal ranges, different volume capabilities, different ways of using sound to communicate. As the sun begins to set, you notice something else carved into the stone. Names. Hundreds of names, carved in different scripts, different sizes of lettering. Some you recognize as variations of names still used in your village. Others are completely foreign. But they're grouped together, as if people of different sizes and cultures had signed their names side by side. At the bottom of one section, you find something that makes your blood run cold. Your own family name, carved in letters 3 times larger than you could make, next to what might be the giant equivalent. The lettering style suggests it was carved centuries ago, long before your great-great-grandfather was born. Someone in your bloodline was important enough to the giants that they carved your family name in stone. Someone in your ancestry was part of this forgotten community, this collaboration between worlds that your current culture doesn't even remember existed. The amphitheatre feels haunted now, but not by ghosts. It's haunted by possibilities. By a version of history where differences in size, strength and lifespan weren't barriers but assets. Where communities could include beings as different as humans and giants, working together, celebrating together, creating art together. As darkness falls and you prepare to head home, you take one last look at the carved panels on the stage. In the fading light, the figures seem to move, seemed to whisper stories about a world where being different wasn't the same as being separate. The sound of your footsteps on the ancient road home echoes strangely, as if other feet are walking with you. Feet of various sizes, keeping different rhythms, but all heading in the same direction. For a moment, you're not alone on this path. You're part of a procession that includes people you've never met, walking toward a village that exists in a version of history your world forgot how to remember. You're standing in what your grandfather called the shallow grave, though no one in your village knows why. It's a depression in the earth about 100 yards long and 20 yards wide, too perfectly shaped to be natural, too deliberately placed to be accidental. The soil here is different, richer, darker, as if something massive decomposed beneath your feet generations ago. But it's not a grave, it's a cellar. The realization hits you when you notice the stone edges, worn smooth by centuries of weather, but still visible if you know what to look for. This isn't where someone was buried. This is where someone lived, and the roof fell in. You start digging with the small folding shovel you brought, and within minutes your blade strikes worked stone. Not the rough field stone your people use, but smooth-fitted blocks that lock together without mortar. The kind of construction that was meant to last forever. As you clear away soil and centuries of fallen leaves, a staircase emerges. Each step is nearly 3 feet high, comfortable for someone twice your height, exhausting for someone your size. But you climb down anyway, your heart hammering with excitement and something closer to terror. The underground chamber stretches further than your torchlight can reach. The ceiling, or what's left of it, arches overhead in a style of architecture that exists nowhere in your current world. Support pillars thick as ancient trees march into the darkness, each one carved with spiraling patterns that seem to move in the flickering light. But it's the furniture that makes your hands shake. Tables and chairs sized for giants, but not just giants. Mixed throughout the massive furniture are smaller pieces, human-sized chairs pulled up to the enormous tables, as if families of different sizes regularly shared meals here. Tool racks hold implements of various scales. Cookware ranges from pots large enough to bathe in down to delicate cups that would fit perfectly in your hands. This was a shared space, a place where beings of different sizes lived together, worked together, ate together. You discover something that changes everything you thought you knew about the relationship between humans and giants. In what appears to be a workshop area, tools are organised not by size but by function. Giant-sized hammers hang next to human-scaled versions. Enormous chisels share space with delicate carving instruments. But most telling are the hybrid tools, implements clearly designed for hands larger than human but smaller than giant. Someone was making tools for people who didn't quite fit either category. The workshop contains projects in various stages of completion. A massive stone sculpture of what might be a communal building, carved with meticulous attention to architectural details. But surrounding it are smaller models, scaled for different-sized inhabitants. Someone was planning construction projects that would accommodate everyone. You find drawings scratched into flat stones, architectural plans that show buildings with multiple levels of accessibility, stairs sized for giants alongside ramps that humans could climb, doorways with adjustable heights, windows at various levels to accommodate different eye heights. These weren't just plans, they were blueprints for a fully integrated society. But something went wrong. Catastrophically wrong. The evidence lies scattered throughout the chamber. Tools, abandoned mid-project. Meals left half-prepared, now turned to dust and stains on ancient plates. Personal belongings scattered as if their owners left in tremendous hurry. And everywhere, you find signs of structural failure. Not gradual decay, but sudden, violent collapse. Support beams snapped in half, stone blocks shifted out of alignment, ceiling sections that fell all at once, crushing whatever lay beneath. But this wasn't earthquake damage. The patterns are wrong for seismic activity. The destruction is too uniform, too systematic. It's as if the very stone lost the will to hold itself up. You discover the truth in a section of wall covered with what you first mistake for decorative carving. But closer inspection reveals writing. Dense text in multiple scripts, some recognisably human, others clearly giant, and several that seem to be hybrid languages designed to bridge the gap between cultures. The text that you can partially decipher tells a story that makes your blood run cold. The translations are rough, filtered through your limited understanding of ancient scripts, but the meaning is clear enough. The sky grows heavier each day. The stones forget their strength. Our children are born smaller, and smaller still. The old songs no longer hold power over mountain and stream. The world shrinks, and we shrink with it. This isn't just historical record, it's documentation of a cosmic disaster. You find more entries, increasingly desperate. The great halls can no longer support their own weight. The bridge across Thunder Valley collapsed in the night, though no storm troubled the air. Our young ones speak of dreams where the earth itself is tired. And then, most chilling, the humans say their babies come easier now, but weaker. Our own children struggle to reach even half their parents' height. Something is stealing size from the world, and we do not know how to fight what we cannot see. The final entries are barely legible, carved with shaking hands. We go to the deep places, where the old stones still remember their purpose. Those who stay grow smaller each season. Those who leave may forget how to grow at all. You realise you're looking at documentation of the Great Diminishing. Not just the end of the giants, but a fundamental change in the laws that govern size, strength, and structural integrity in the world itself. The evidence is everywhere once you know how to look for it. Architectural features that no longer make sense. Support structures that are overbuilt by any reasonable standard, as if the builders expected stone and wood to be stronger than they currently are. Buildings throughout your own village that seem to have settled more than they should, sagging under weights they were clearly designed to bear. But the most disturbing discovery waits in what appears to be a nursery. Cradles of various sizes line one wall, from giant-sized down to human-proportioned. But the progression isn't random. They're arranged chronologically, based on wear patterns and construction techniques. The oldest cradles are enormous. The newest are barely larger than what your people would use. Someone was tracking the diminishment of their children across generations, keeping records of a species slowly shrinking out of existence. The implications are staggering. Giants didn't just disappear or die out, they got smaller. Generation by generation, century by century, they diminished until they weren't giants anymore. Until they were something else. Until they were... You look at your own hands, suddenly uncertain. Your family has always been slightly taller than average. Your grandfather's stories about the old times were always filled with references to when people were different. Your village's oldest buildings are over-engineered in ways that only make sense if their builders expected them to bear loads far beyond what they currently carry. The nursery contains one final piece of evidence, a growth chart carved into the stone wall tracking children's heights over time. The measurements start at scales appropriate for giant children and progress down to sizes that would be considered tall for humans. But the chart doesn't end with human proportions. It continues downward, documenting heights that would be small even by human standards. The diminishment didn't stop at human scale, it kept going. As you climb back up the ancient staircase, your legs shaking from exhaustion and revelation, you understand that you're not just exploring ruins. You're standing in evidence of a world-changing disaster that your culture has completely forgotten. The Great Diminishing wasn't just about giants getting smaller. It was about everything getting smaller. About the fundamental forces that determine size, strength, and structural integrity gradually weakening throughout the world. And if the pattern continued, if the diminishment never stopped, then somewhere in the deep places where the giants went to escape it, there might still be people getting smaller. Still shrinking, still diminishing, still waiting for someone to remember that the world used to be big enough for giants. You're sitting in your village's archive chamber, surrounded by records that supposedly chronicle your people's entire history. Birth records, death records, harvest tallies, weather observations, notable events. Centuries of careful documentation that should contain every important moment in your community's past. But you're starting to notice what's not there. The earliest records, written in your ancestors' careful script, contain casual references to things that make no sense in your current world. Supply lists that include giant bread flour as a regular purchase, construction notes mentioning high-reach consultations for building projects, marriage records occasionally noting that ceremonies were held in the Valley Amphitheatre for better acoustics. These references appear constantly in the oldest documents, then gradually become less frequent, then disappear entirely. By the time you reach records from about 200 years ago, There's no mention of giants, amphitheatres, or anything that suggests your ancestors lived alongside beings different from themselves. But the weirdest part isn't what disappears, it's how it disappears. You find evidence of systematic editing, places where words have been carefully scraped away and replaced with different terms. Giant bread flour becomes coarse flour. High-reach consultations becomes structural planning. Valley amphitheatre becomes southern meadow. Someone went through centuries of records and methodically erased every reference to giants and giant-related activities. But they did it carefully, preserving the grammatical structure and logical flow of the documents. This wasn't vandalism or accident. This was deliberate historical revision. The editing style is consistent across multiple hands and decades, suggesting an organised effort rather than individual initiative. Someone created guidelines for how to remove giant-related content while maintaining the believability of the remaining text. You discover the smoking gun in a file that was apparently misfiled, a document that escaped the revision process. It's a town council meeting record from about 180 years ago, and the subject matter makes your hands tremble as you read. Motion passed 7-2 to begin. Implementation of the memory project. Subsequent generations must be protected from the grief of loss by gradual removal of references to our former companions from all official records. Children born after this date will be raised without knowledge of the Great Departure, allowing them to develop without the burden of missing what they never knew existed. The Memory Project, a deliberate campaign to erase giants from your culture's historical record. The document continues. Doctor. Erickson's research confirms that communal trauma from the Great Departure has resulted in decreased birth rates, increased melancholy, and reduced agricultural productivity. Communities that have successfully eliminated giant-related memories show marked improvement in all measured areas of social health. But the most chilling entry reads, "The children ask fewer questions when the stories are consistent. They adapt to a smaller world more easily when they believe it was always small." You find Dr. Erickson's research notes in a separate file, and they paint a picture of a community in psychological crisis. Interview after interview with people describing symptoms that sound like collective grief disorder. Persistent sadness without identifiable cause, recurring dreams about missing friends, children drawing pictures of people too large to exist, adults experiencing phantom memories of events that supposedly never happened. But instead of treating the grief, Dr. Erickson recommended eliminating its source. His solution wasn't to help people process their loss, it was to make them forget they had lost anything. The research includes detailed protocols for memory modification through environmental control. Remove all physical reminders of giants, edit historical records, create alternative explanations for giant-built structures, develop new cultural narratives that make a human-only world seem natural and complete. Most disturbing, his notes describe techniques for gentle correction of children who displayed giant memories, persistent beliefs that giants had existed, claims of having seen giant-related structures, dreams or stories involving giant characters. The correction techniques range from subtle redirection to more aggressive interventive measures. Children who insisted on giant-related memories were isolated from peers, given intensive reality training, and in extreme cases treated with herbs that Dr. Erickson claimed would clarify thinking and reduce fantasy attachment. You realise you're looking at documentation of cultural lobotomy. An entire society chose to surgically remove a crucial part of its own history rather than learn to cope with loss. But the Memory Project wasn't entirely successful. You find evidence of resistance, of people who fought against the forgetting. Underground networks that preserved giant-related artifacts. Secret societies that continued telling the old stories. Families that maintained private shrines to departed giant friends. A resistance document, hidden within what appears to be a recipe collection, contains this plea. They tell us forgetting will stop the pain, but forgetting also stops the love. Our giant friends deserve to be remembered, even if remembering hurts, especially if remembering hurts. The Resistance members developed elaborate codes for preserving giant-related information. Stories disguised as fairy tales, historical information embedded in seemingly innocent songs, maps to giant structures hidden within agricultural diagrams. But the Resistance was fighting a losing battle. Each generation born under the Memory Project was more susceptible to the revised version of history. Children raised without giant-related memories couldn't relate to adult pain about giant loss. They saw their parents' and grandparents' sadness as irrational nostalgia for imaginary friends. Within 3 generations, the Memory Project achieved its goal. People stopped missing giants because they no longer remembered that giants had ever existed to be missed. You find evaluation documents tracking the project's success. Community mental health improved markedly. Birth rates returned to normal levels. Agricultural productivity increased. By every measurable standard, the Memory Project was a tremendous success. Except for one unexpected side effect. Your people lost the ability to conceive of anything larger than themselves. Dr. Erickson's final research notes, written near the end of his life, suggest he recognized this too late. Without giants as reference points, humans began to think smaller in every sense. Architectural projects became less ambitious. Art focused on intimate rather than epic themes. Exploration and expansion activities declined dramatically. His last entry reads, "We saved our people from the pain of missing giants, but we may have also saved them from the inspiration of remembering that larger things were possible." The Memory Project files include transition documents explaining how to maintain the false history across generations. Teachers were trained to redirect curiosity about overbuilt structures, archaeological anomalies, and folk tales that didn't quite fit the official narrative. But the most sophisticated aspect of the project was its self-concealment mechanism. The Memory Project files themselves were scheduled for destruction once the forgetting was complete. The fact that you're reading them now suggests either incomplete implementation or deliberate preservation by someone who wanted the truth to eventually surface. You find a note attached to the final file, for the generation wise enough to handle remembering. It's signed with a name you recognize from your family's genealogy. Your great-great-grandmother, who died when you were too young to remember her, but who your parents always described as a woman who told the most interesting stories. She preserved these documents. She made sure the Memory Project didn't completely succeed. She left a trail for someone in your generation to follow, betting that enough time had passed for your community to handle the truth about its own deliberate amnesia. As you sit surrounded by evidence of your culture's systematic self-deception, you understand that you're not just discovering hidden history, you're uncovering proof that your people once had the emotional and intellectual capacity to live alongside giants, to build integrated communities with beings fundamentally different from themselves. The Memory Project didn't just hide the fact that giants existed, it erased evidence that humans were once capable of friendship across radical differences, cooperation across enormous scales, and love that transcended the boundaries of species and size. Your ancestors weren't just smaller physically than they had been during the Age of Giants. They made themselves smaller emotionally, intellectually, and spiritually, because they decided that smallness was safer than the pain of missing something magnificent. You're following a map drawn in your great-great-grandmother's handwriting, hidden in the Memory Project files like a message in a bottle. The path leads up into the high mountains, to a place she marked with a simple notation, "The ones who chose remembering over forgetting." The trail is harder than anything you've attempted before. The air thins with each step, and the familiar landmarks of your valley disappear behind ridges that seem to fold in on themselves. But there's something else changing as you climb, the scale of things. Trees grow taller up here, their trunks broader than anything in the lowlands. Rocks jut from the earth in formations that look almost architectural, as if the mountains themselves were built rather than formed. The very air feels different, denser somehow, as if it remembers what it was like to fill the lungs of larger beings. You find the first evidence 3 hours into the climb, footprints in a patch of soft earth beside a stream. They're human size but proportioned wrong, wider and longer than feet should be for someone your height. The stride length suggests someone taller than anyone in your village, but not giant tall, something in between. The footprints aren't alone. You see tracks from several individuals, all similar in size, moving together up the mountain path. But what makes your breath catch is the freshness of the tracks. These aren't ancient impressions preserved by luck and weather. These were made recently, days ago, maybe less. You follow the tracks around a bend in the trail and freeze. Smoke is rising from somewhere ahead, too much smoke for a simple campfire. Someone is maintaining a significant fire. the kind you'd use for cooking large quantities of food or heating a substantial shelter. The sound reaches you before you see its source. Voices. Multiple people talking, but their voices carry further and sound different than voices should. Deeper, more resonant, as if the speakers have larger chest cavities to push air through. You creep forward, staying low until you can peer over a ridge into a hidden valley that exists on no map you've ever seen. What you see there changes everything you thought you knew about what happened to the people who lived alongside giants. The valley contains a settlement, but not like any settlement from your world. The buildings are sized for people larger than humans, but smaller than the giants whose ruins you've explored. 7 to 8 feet seems to be the standard height, with doorways, windows, and furniture all proportioned accordingly. But the people moving between those buildings are the real revelation. They look human, but not quite. Taller, broader, with features that seem like stretched versions of faces you might see in your own village. Their movements are more deliberate, more careful, as if they're constantly aware of their own size and strength. These aren't giants. They're not quite human either. They're something in between, and they're very much alive. You watch as they go about daily activities that seem familiar but scaled up. Tending gardens where individual plants are larger than any you've seen. Maintaining tools that are clearly functional but sized for hands bigger than yours. Cooking meals in vessels that could feed your entire family. But the most striking thing about watching them is how they move through their world. They're gentle in a way that suggests constant practice. They touch things carefully, as if remembering that the rest of the world is more fragile than they are. Every gesture suggests people who have learned to live with strength they have to consciously control. You're so focused on observing that you don't notice the approach of footsteps behind you until a shadow falls across your hiding spot. You turn around slowly, your heart hammering, to find yourself looking up at a woman who stands nearly 8 feet tall. Her face is kind but cautious. She's clearly human in all the ways that matter, but scaled up in proportions that make your neck ache to maintain eye contact. When she speaks, her voice is exactly what you'd expect from someone with a larger ribcage and throat. "You're from the valley settlements," she says. It's not a question. You have the look of the people who chose forgetting. She doesn't seem angry or threatening, just sad in a way that seems to go bone deep. When you nod, unable to trust your voice, she sighs, a sound like wind through larger trees. "I'm Vera," she says. "My great-grandmother was friends with your great-great-grandmother before the memory project began. We've been wondering when someone from below would finally climb up to find us. She leads you down into the valley, and the settlement reveals details that become more remarkable the closer you get. This isn't a primitive hiding place. It's a sophisticated community that has clearly thrived in isolation for generations. The architecture shows influences from both human and giant construction techniques, but adapted for people of intermediate size. Buildings that are impressively large without being impossibly massive. Furniture that accommodates longer limbs without requiring ladders to reach. But it's the people who stop you in your tracks. Adults who range from 7 to nearly 9 feet tall, children who are already taller than most adults in your village, and elders whose size suggests they remember when the world supported even larger beings. They gather around you with curiosity rather than suspicion, asking questions about the valley below, about your village, about what people remember from the old days. When you tell them about the Memory Project documents, about discovering the truth about systematic forgetting, their faces show a mix of satisfaction and sadness. "We knew eventually someone would find the records," an elderly man tells you. "His name is Marcus, and he stands tall enough that you have to crane your neck to see his face clearly. Your great-great-grandmother promised us she'd leave a trail for the right person to follow." Marcus explains their history, while others in the community gather to listen. When the Great Diminishing began, when giants started getting smaller and the world's capacity for supporting large beings started failing, communities faced choices about how to respond. Most chose adaptation, accepting the diminishment, adjusting to smaller scales, trying to make the best of a world that was contracting around them. Your ancestors chose forgetting, eliminating the pain of loss by erasing the memory of what was lost. But some communities chose resistance. "We came up here," Marcus says, "to the places where the old forces still run strong, where the diminishment is slower, where we can maintain more of what we used to be." The resistance wasn't just about preserving size, it was about preserving memory, culture, and the knowledge of what humans were capable of when they lived alongside beings larger than themselves. The community has maintained libraries of pre-diminishing knowledge, workshops where traditional giant-influenced crafts are still practiced, and most importantly stories that preserve accurate history about the age of giants. But their resistance comes at a cost. They can't return to the lowlands. The diminishment effect is too strong there, and they would shrink to normal human proportions within a generation. They're trapped in the high places, maintaining a version of humanity that the rest of the world has forgotten existed. We're not just larger people, Vera explains. We're the people who remember what it was like to be small in a world that contained giants. We remember how to think big, how to build for scales beyond ourselves, how to conceive of magnificence. They show you their workshops, where they continue crafting items for beings of various sizes. Not just tools and furniture for their own community, but gifts intended for the giants who disappeared into the deep places during the Great Diminishing. We don't know if any of them are still alive, Marcus admits, but if they are, if they're out there somewhere getting smaller like everything else, we want them to know they're not forgotten. The community has maintained traditions from the age of giants. Architectural techniques for building structures that can accommodate multiple scales of inhabitants, diplomatic protocols for negotiating between beings of different sizes and lifespans, and cultural practices designed to preserve knowledge across generations of diminishment. But most importantly, they've preserved hope. Hope that the Great Diminishing might be reversible. Hope that contact with the giants might be re-established. Hope that the world might someday be large enough for magnificence again. As evening falls and you prepare to spend the night in this remarkable community, you realize you've found more than survivors of a forgotten age. You've found proof that resistance to diminishment is possible, that humans don't have to accept a smaller world as inevitable. The people of this high valley chose remembering over forgetting, growth over shrinkage, hope over resignation. They maintained their size not just physically but emotionally and intellectually. They kept alive the capacity for thinking beyond human scale, and they've been waiting for someone from the lowlands to climb up and learn how to remember what it means to live in a world big enough for giants. You're descending through what Marcus calls the throat, a natural chimney in the rock that plunges deeper into the earth than anything you imagined possible. The rope you're following disappears into darkness so complete it seems solid. Your torch flame wavers not from air currents, but from something else. Something that suggests the darkness down here is different from ordinary night. The walls of the throat are smooth, worn by centuries of passage, but they're marked with handholds carved for various sizes of climbers. Some you can use comfortably, others are spaced for much longer reaches. A few are so large you have to use both hands to grip what was intended as a single handhold. Vera descends ahead of you with the easy confidence of someone who has made this journey many times. Her larger frame moves through the chimney with surprising grace, finding holds and anchor points that work for her scale. Behind you, Marcus follows with equal skill, his experience evident in how he anticipates the rope's behaviour in this vertical environment. The giants didn't just disappear, Vera calls up from below, her voice echoing strangely in the confined space. They went deeper, always deeper, following the old paths down to where the diminishment can't reach. You've been descending for what feels like hours when your feet finally touch horizontal stone. The torch reveals a tunnel carved from living rock, its walls covered in symbols that seem to shift and change in the flickering light. The ceiling arches high overhead, not quite giant-scaled, but larger than anything humans would need. The air down here tastes different, older, heavier, as if it's been breathed by things that existed long before your world developed its current proportions. Marcus strikes a larger torch and hands it to you. In the improved light, the tunnel reveals details that make your hands shake. The walls aren't just carved with symbols, they're carved with a record. A visual chronicle that stretches into the distance, documenting the journey of beings retreating deeper into the earth. The first panels show giants at full size, moving in organised groups, carrying carefully packed belongings. But as the chronicle progresses along the tunnel walls, the figures get progressively smaller, not dramatically but noticeably. The Great Diminishing followed them even here, but slowly, giving them time to adapt, to adjust, to prepare for each reduction in scale. This is the Chronicle Road, Marcus explains. Every group that passed through here added to the record. Look at the dates. The dating system is carved in symbols that take you a moment to decipher, but when you do, the timeline becomes clear. The Chronicle Road documents nearly 3 centuries of giant migration into the deep places, wave after wave of beings retreating from a world that could no longer support their size. But the Chronicle doesn't just show retreat, it shows adaptation. As the figures get smaller, their techniques become more sophisticated. Better tools, more efficient packing systems, innovative solutions for problems of scale and proportion. You find panels showing the development of new architectural techniques designed for shrinking populations, buildings with adjustable features, furniture that could be modified as its users got smaller, transportation systems designed to work for multiple scales simultaneously. The giants weren't just fleeing the diminishment, they were learning to live with it. The tunnel branches ahead, and Vera leads you down a path marked with symbols that indicate recent passage. The walls here show signs of more contemporary use. Torch sconces with relatively fresh soot, where patterns that suggest regular traffic, even what might be maintenance work on sections of damaged carving. How recent, you ask, though part of you isn't sure you want the answer. The last confirmed passage was about 15 years ago, Marcus replies. A group of 12 individuals, average height about 14 feet. The diminishment is accelerating as we go deeper. 14 feet, still giants by any human standard, but dramatically smaller than the 20-plus foot beings shown in the earliest panels of the Chronicle Road. If the diminishment continued at this rate, you realise giants might currently be closer to 10 or 12 feet tall, still giants, but not the massive beings of ancient legend. The tunnel opens into a vast underground chamber, and your torch suddenly seems pitifully inadequate. The space extends beyond the reach of any light you could carry, but what you can see takes your breath away. This isn't a natural cave, it's a city. Streets stretch into the darkness, lined with buildings of various sizes. Architecture that started giant-scaled but shows modifications, additions and adjustments for smaller inhabitants. Doorways that have been narrowed, ceilings that have been lowered, furniture that has been rebuilt multiple times for progressively smaller users. But the city isn't empty. Light flickers in distant windows. Smoke rises from chimneys sized for inhabitants you can't see but can guess at. Sounds echo from the depths. Voices, movement, the normal activities of a living community. Welcome to Underhome, Vera says quietly. The last giant city. You move through streets that tell the story of a civilization in gradual retreat. Buildings that were clearly constructed for beings of massive size, then systematically modified for smaller and smaller inhabitants. The architectural record shows generations of adaptation, of communities learning to live in spaces that grew relatively larger as their occupants grew smaller. But it's not a story of decline. The modifications show ingenuity, creativity, and remarkable adaptability. Solutions to problems that human architects have never had to consider. How do you heat a building designed for 20-foot residents when your current inhabitants are 15 feet tall? How do you light spaces scaled for giants when your light sources are sized for smaller beings? The answers are everywhere you look. Ingenious redirected heating systems, light reflectors that amplify smaller flames, modular furniture that can be adjusted as needed. Transportation systems, carts, pulleys, ramps, designed to serve multiple scales simultaneously. You turn a corner and stop dead. Walking toward you down the street is a figure that makes you question everything you thought you knew about giants. He's tall, maybe 12 feet, but moving with the careful grace you've learned to associate with beings who are consciously managing their size in a world built for different proportions. His features are clearly related to the human face, but scaled up and somehow refined, as if generations of living in the deep places has produced its own evolutionary pressures. When he sees your group, he stops and speaks in a voice that's deep but not overwhelming. The language is recognizable, related to tongues spoken in your world, but evolved, changed by centuries of isolation and adaptation. Vera responds in what sounds like the same language, and a conversation follows that you can partially understand. Formal greetings, introductions, explanations of your presence. The giant, and despite his reduced size, that's still the only word that fits, listens with interest when Vera explains about your discovery of the Memory Project documents, your journey to the High Valley, your descent into the deep places. When she's finished, he looks at you directly. His eyes are proportioned for his larger skull, but the intelligence behind them is unmistakably the same kind of intelligence you see in human faces. When he speaks, addressing you specifically, you catch enough words to understand his meaning. You are the one who remembered how to climb toward giants. His name, as near as you can pronounce it, is Corvain. He's what passes for young in current giant society, maybe 80 years old, which for beings with extended lifespans still counts as early adulthood. He's never seen the surface world, never experienced anything but the deep places and the gradually shrinking community that maintains civilization in the depths. But he knows the history. He knows about the world above, about the Great Diminishing, about the human communities that chose forgetting over remembering. And he's been waiting his entire life for someone from the surface to make the journey down. "We have something to show you," he says, switching to a version of your language that's heavily accented but perfectly comprehensible. "Something we've been preparing for the day when surface dwellers learn to find us again." He leads you deeper into Underholm, through districts that show the full scope of giant adaptation to diminishment. Workshops where craftspeople half the size of their ancestors continue traditions scaled down but not simplified. Libraries where books written for giant hands have been carefully transcribed into smaller formats without losing any content. Schools where giant children, still giant by human standards but tiny compared to their ancestors, learn histories that go back to when the world was large enough for their kind. But the most remarkable thing about Underholm isn't its adaptation to smaller scales. It's that it has continued to grow, to develop, to evolve. This isn't just a civilization in retreat. It's a civilization that has learned to thrive under conditions that would have destroyed communities less capable of radical adaptation. The giants didn't just survive the Great Diminishing, they mastered it. Corvain leads you through winding passages that branch off from Underholm's main thoroughfares into sections of the city that feel different, older, more sacred, carefully maintained in ways that suggest deep cultural significance. The walls here are covered not with practical modifications but with deliberate preservation. Every surface tells stories, maintains records, preserves knowledge. "This is the memory ward," Corvain explains, his voice taking on the reverential tone people use in the presence of something they consider holy. "Where we keep everything we've learned about living with diminishment, everything we've figured out about remembering what we used to be while adapting to what we're becoming." The first chamber he shows you takes your breath away. The walls are covered floor to ceiling with what can only be described as a visual encyclopedia. Paintings, diagrams, technical drawings, and narrative murals that document every aspect of giant culture, both before and during the Great Diminishing. But these aren't just historical records, they're instruction manuals. You see detailed diagrams showing how to modify giant-scaled architecture for smaller inhabitants without losing its essential character. Step-by-step illustrations for scaling down tools, furniture, and equipment while maintaining their functionality. Even cultural guides, how to adapt ceremonies, traditions, and social practices for communities that are literally getting smaller every generation. When the diminishment began, Corvain explains, our ancestors realized that survival would require more than just physical adaptation. We had to learn to preserve culture across radical changes in scale. How do you maintain the essence of giant civilization when giants are getting smaller? The answer, evidently, was systematic documentation of everything. Not just what giant culture looked like at full scale, but how to modify, adapt, and preserve every aspect of it across the spectrum of sizes that diminishment would force them through. You find sections dedicated to architectural preservation, not just building techniques, but the cultural and spiritual significance of different spatial proportions. Giants, you learn, don't just live in large spaces because they're physically large. They experience space differently, relate to scale in ways that are fundamental to their psychology and social structures. The diagrams show how to maintain those spatial relationships even as the people occupying the spaces get smaller, how to preserve the sense of grandeur, the feeling of living within something magnificent, even when the absolute measurements are reduced. But the most sophisticated section deals with something you hadn't considered: how to maintain giant social structures across changing physical proportions. Giant society, Corvain explains, developed around their size, strength, and lifespan advantages. Social hierarchies, decision-making processes, family structures and community relationships were all adapted to beings who are physically and temporally different from humans. A giant's natural lifespan is about 400 years, Corvain tells you, running his fingers along a chart that shows population dynamics across centuries. Our children mature slowly, our adults remain productive for centuries, our elders accumulate knowledge that spans entire ages of human civilization. But diminishment affected more than just physical size. As giants got smaller, their lifespans shortened, their maturation rates accelerated, their physical capabilities changed. Communities that had developed over millennia around certain assumptions about scale and time had to completely restructure themselves. The memory ward documents show how they did it. Social structures that were redesigned for shorter lifespans without losing their essential character. Cultural practices modified for smaller groups without sacrificing their meaning. Knowledge preservation systems adapted for communities that had less time and fewer resources than their ancestors. The most remarkable section deals with what they call proportional psychology, the study of how mental and emotional patterns change as physical size changes. Giants think differently than humans, Corvain explains, not because we're inherently different, but because we experience the world from a different scale. When you're 25 feet tall, your relationship to space, time, and other beings shapes how you process information, make decisions, form relationships. The diminishment didn't just make giants smaller. It gradually changed how they thought, how they felt, how they related to the world around them. The memory ward contains detailed studies of these psychological changes, along with techniques for maintaining giant thought patterns even as physical size decreased. You find meditation practices designed to preserve the mental experience of being large, architectural tricks that help smaller beings maintain giant-scaled thinking, social rituals that reinforce cultural identity even when the physical basis for that identity is changing. But the most profound discovery waits in a section Corvain calls the contact archives. We never lost hope that someday the surface world would remember us, he says, leading you to a chamber filled with preparations for exactly that eventuality. Everything here was created for the day when humans would climb down to find us. The contact archives contain what amounts to a complete cultural exchange program, language guides for communicating between giant and human communities, diplomatic protocols for establishing relationships between societies of different scales, technical manuals for collaborative projects between beings of different sizes and capabilities. Most remarkably, the archives include detailed plans for surface contact. Not just how to communicate with humans, but how to help human communities readapt to the existence of giants. How to rebuild the kind of integrated societies that existed before the Great Diminishing and the Memory Project. We've been planning for a reunion, Corvain tells you, because we know that both our peoples are diminished by separation. The archives contain analyses of human development since the giant departure, studies of how human culture, architecture, and psychology changed after giants disappeared from their world. The giants have been watching, somehow keeping track of surface developments, understanding how the loss of giants affected human society. Their conclusion is startling. Humans didn't just lose their giant friends, they lost crucial aspects of their own cultural development. Without giants as reference points, human communities stopped thinking at giant scales. Architecture became less ambitious, social projects became smaller, cultural aspirations became more limited. Humans were never meant to be the largest intelligent beings in their world, Corvain explains. Your culture developed in relationship to ours. When we left, you lost more than companions. You lost the inspiration that comes from living alongside magnificence. The contact archives include plans for carefully reintroducing humans to giant society. Not just tourism or occasional contact, but genuine cultural exchange that would allow both societies to benefit from reunion. The giants have developed techniques for helping humans readjust to giant-scaled thinking. Architecture designed to accommodate multiple scales simultaneously. Social structures that can include beings of different sizes, strengths, and lifespans. Cultural practices that celebrate difference rather than demanding uniformity. But the most ambitious section deals with something they call the Restoration Project. We think the Great Diminishing might be reversible, Corvain says quietly. Not quickly, not easily, but potentially. If we can understand what caused it, we might be able to understand how to undo it. The restoration project combines giant knowledge of pre-diminishing conditions with human understanding of current surface conditions. The theory is that the diminishment was caused by some kind of environmental or cosmic change that affected the fundamental forces that determine size and scale in living beings. If that change could be identified and countered, it might be possible to restore the world's capacity for supporting beings of giant scale. Not just making current giants larger, but making it possible for new generations to grow to the sizes their ancestors achieved. The contact archives represent hundreds of years of preparation for a reunion that the giants never stopped believing would eventually happen. They've maintained not just their own culture, but their understanding of human culture, their ability to communicate across scales, and their hope that both peoples could benefit from re-establishing the relationships that the Great Diminishing and the Memory Project interrupted. As you stand surrounded by centuries of careful preparation for contact with the surface world, you realize that your journey into the deep places isn't just about discovering what happened to the giants. It's about participating in the first steps toward healing a rupture in the world that has diminished everyone involved. The giants have been waiting in the deep places, not just surviving, but preparing for the day when humans would remember how to find them. And now that day has finally arrived. Corvain guides you deeper into the memory ward, to a section that feels different from the archives and documentation chambers you've seen so far. The air here vibrates with a low, almost inaudible humming, and the walls seem to pulse with some kind of energy that makes your skin tingle. "This is the scale chamber," Corvain says, his voice dropping to a whisper, "where we maintain the arts that your surface world has forgotten, the knowledge of how to work with the forces that determine size, growth, and proportion in living things." The chamber is filled with apparatus that looks part workshop, part laboratory, part something else entirely. Devices that seem to bend light around them, crystals that resonate with sounds you feel rather than hear, instruments that measure things you don't have names for. But it's the practitioners that make you step backward involuntarily. 3 giants work at different stations throughout the chamber, but they're not like any giants you've encountered. They're tall, maybe 15 feet, but their proportions are somehow more perfect than anything you've seen. Their movements have a precision that suggests complete mastery of their physical form. Most unsettling, they seem to shimmer slightly, as if the boundaries of their bodies aren't quite fixed. The scale keepers, Corvain explains, the last practitioners of the growth arts. They've spent their lives learning to work with the forces that the Great Diminishing disrupted. One of the scale keepers approaches you, and you have to fight the urge to run. Not because she seems threatening, but because being near her makes reality feel unstable. The air around her seems denser, space seems to bend slightly, and your own body feels somehow more solid in her presence. When she speaks, her voice carries harmonics that resonate in your chest cavity. "You're from the surface," she says, "but it's not a question. We can see the diminishment patterns in your cellular structure. Your people have been shrinking for generations, even more than you realize." She moves to one of her instruments and gestures for you to approach. The device looks like a combination telescope and tuning fork, with crystal components that pulse with their own inner light. "Look," she says, adjusting the instrument's alignment. "See yourself as you really are." You peer through the eyepiece and gasp. Instead of seeing a magnified version of your eye or face, you're looking at what appears to be a 3-dimensional map of your body, but with additional layers of information overlaid on the familiar human form. The green patterns show your growth potential, the Scalekeeper explains. The blue shows your current size stabilization. The red indicates diminishment damage. Your body, in this enhanced view, is shot through with red. Lines of red that flow through your skeletal system, your musculature, even your nervous system. You're looking at evidence that the Great Diminishing has affected you personally, has been affecting your family line for generations. Humans in the surface world are about 30% smaller than they were before the Great Diminishing began, she continues. But the diminishment has also affected your psychology, your cultural capacity, your ability to conceive of scales beyond your immediate experience. She adjusts the instrument again, and the view changes to show what appears to be energy patterns flowing around your body. But the patterns look incomplete, as if portions of some kind of energy field have been severed or damaged. "This is your scale resonance," she explains. "The energy pattern that determines how you relate to size, proportion, and magnitude. In healthy humans from before the diminishing, This pattern extends much further, connects to larger cosmic rhythms, enables appreciation of genuinely massive scales. The implications are staggering. The Great Diminishing didn't just make giants smaller, it affected humans too, limiting not just their physical growth but their psychological and cultural capacity to relate to anything beyond human scale. Can it be repaired, you ask, though you're not sure you want to know the answer? The scale keeper smiles, and when she does, the air around her brightens noticeably. That's what we've been working on for the past 2 centuries. We think we've figured out how to reverse the diminishment damage, at least partially. She leads you to another section of the chamber where 2 other scale keepers are working with what appears to be a living crystal formation. The crystal pulses with rhythms that seem to match some kind of biological process, and the space around it feels more real, more solid than anywhere else you've been. This is a growth catalyst, she explains. We've been growing it for 50 years, feeding it with concentrated scale resonance patterns from the deep places. It contains enough undiluted growth force to potentially restore diminishment damage in a limited number of individuals. The process, she explains, isn't simple or quick. Reversing diminishment damage requires exposure to concentrated growth forces over extended periods. The individual has to learn to work with scales of experience that their current psychology can't quite handle. Most importantly, they have to maintain connection to both their original diminished state and their restored scale capacity. We can make you larger, she says, but only if you can learn to think larger. The physical changes won't hold unless the psychological changes support them. She shows you records of the experiments they've conducted. Giants who are further diminished by surface exposure have been restored to their original sizes, but more remarkably, they've also worked with volunteers from the High Valley communities. People like Vera and Marcus, who chose remembering over forgetting but still experienced some diminishment effects. The results are documented in careful detail. Individuals who underwent scale restoration didn't just get physically larger. They experienced expanded psychological capacity, increased cultural imagination, and enhanced ability to work with concepts and projects beyond their previous scope. We think, the Scalekeeper continues, that scale restoration might be the key to healing the rift between giant and human communities. If humans can be restored to their pre-diminishment physical and psychological capacity, if giants can be stabilized at sustainable sizes, both communities might be able to rebuild the integrated societies that existed before the Great Diminishing. But the process comes with risks. Scale restoration puts tremendous stress on individuals who attempt it. Not everyone can handle the psychological expansion that comes with physical growth. Some people, restored to larger sizes, become unstable, unable to maintain coherent identity across multiple scales of experience. The Scalekeepers have been refining their techniques, learning to match restoration approaches to individual psychological profiles. Some people respond better to gradual change over years, others require rapid transformation followed by intensive integration support. We'd like to try the process with you, the Scalekeeper says, not just because you're the first surface dweller to reach us in generations, but because your journey here suggests you have the psychological flexibility that scale restoration requires. The offer hangs in the air like a challenge, the chance to experience reversal of diminishment damage, to understand what humans were like before the Great Diminishing affected them, to bridge the gap between current human experience and the larger scales that giants represent. But it would mean changing in ways you can't fully anticipate, becoming something larger than what you currently are, not just physically but psychologically and culturally. Learning to think and feel and relate to the world from a perspective that your current human experience doesn't include. Take time to consider, the Scalekeeper says. This decision affects not just you, but the communities you return to. If you undergo scale restoration and return to the surface world, you become a bridge between what humans are now and what they could become again. The humming in the chamber intensifies, and you realize that the sound comes from the growth catalyst itself, resonating with some kind of cosmic rhythm that your ears are just barely capable of detecting. The rhythm speaks of growth, expansion, the restoration of interrupted natural processes. Standing in the scale chamber, surrounded by apparatus and knowledge that could fundamentally change what it means to be human, you understand that your journey into the deep places has brought you to a crossroads that extends far beyond personal choice. The Scalekeepers have preserved not just the knowledge of how to work with the forces that determine size and growth, They've preserved the possibility of healing the Great Diminishing itself, of restoring the world's capacity for supporting beings of multiple scales, of rebuilding the integrated communities that existed before giants and humans were separated by cosmic forces neither group fully understood. The choice before you isn't just about whether to undergo scale restoration personally. It's about whether to become part of the solution to a problem that has diminished everyone involved, human and giant alike. You've been preparing for 3 days, following protocols the Scale Keepers developed over decades of research. Meditation exercises to expand your psychological flexibility. Dietary changes to prepare your body for rapid cellular modification. Most challenging mental training to help you maintain coherent identity while experiencing dramatic changes in scale perception. The growth catalyst has been prepared specifically for your transformation. The living crystal formation now pulses with rhythms that seem calibrated to your individual biological patterns. The Scale Keepers have spent hours studying your diminishment damage, designing a restoration process that will address your specific needs without overwhelming your system. But standing in the transformation chamber, wearing the specially woven garments that will expand with your changing body, you realize that all the preparation in the world can't really ready you for what's about to happen. Remember, the lead Scale Keeper tells you, your consciousness will expand before your body catches up. Don't fight the psychological changes. Let your mind learn to inhabit larger perspectives, and your physical form will follow. The chamber itself is a marvel of giant engineering adapted for delicate work. Crystal formations line the walls, each one tuned to specific frequencies that interact with biological growth processes. The floor is covered with patterns that seem to shift and flow, creating visual rhythms that help synchronize your nervous system with the cosmic forces the procedure will invoke. Covain stands beside the main control apparatus, monitoring readouts that track your biological status. We'll start slowly, he explains, just enough restoration to reverse some of the diminishment damage, help you experience what pre-diminishing human consciousness was like. The process begins with sound, harmonics that you feel more than hear, vibrations that seem to penetrate every cell in your body. The sensation isn't painful, but it's overwhelming. You can feel your cellular structure responding to frequencies that encourage growth, expansion, the reversal of processes that have been limiting your development for generations. Then the light changes. The crystals begin to pulse with colours that don't quite exist in normal human experience, spectrums that your eyes have to adapt to see. As your vision adjusts, you realise you're not just seeing new colours, you're seeing more of everything. Details that were invisible before become clear. The chamber seems to contain more space than it did moments earlier. Your consciousness starts to expand first, just as the Scale Keeper predicted. Thoughts that would normally flow in linear sequences begin to operate in parallel processing patterns. You can hold multiple complex ideas simultaneously, see connections between concepts that seemed unrelated before, understand systems at scales that previously overwhelmed your analytical capacity. The psychological expansion is exhilarating and terrifying. You feel your mind stretching to accommodate ways of thinking that are fundamentally different from normal human cognition. Not better or worse, but larger in scope, more capable of working with massive scales of time, space, and complexity. Then your body begins to change. The growth isn't painful, but it's impossible to ignore. You can feel your skeletal system lengthening, your muscle tissue expanding, your organs scaling up to serve a larger physical form. Your clothes, woven from giant silk that responds to biological changes, stretch and adjust to accommodate your increasing size. But the most remarkable change is in your relationship to the space around you. As you grow taller, your perspective on the chamber shifts. Ceiling features that were far overhead become eye level. Equipment that seemed massive becomes appropriately scaled. Most importantly, the giants working around you no longer seem impossibly large. They become colleagues, beings you can relate to as equals rather than as overwhelming presences. The Scale Keeper monitors your progress through instruments that track both physical and psychological changes. "Excellent," she murmurs. "Your scale resonance is stabilizing beautifully. You're integrating the changes without losing coherence. By the time the process completes, you've grown from your original human height to nearly 8 feet tall. Not giant scale, but significantly larger than any human in your original world. Your body feels different, Stronger, more stable, capable of movements and activities that your previous form couldn't have managed. But the psychological changes are more profound than the physical ones. Your mind now operates with cognitive capacity that feels like upgrading from a small workshop to a major industrial facility. You can think about multiple complex problems simultaneously, maintain awareness of systems operating at various scales, and most remarkably, feel comfortable with the idea of projects and perspectives that span centuries rather than decades. How do you feel? Corvain asks, his voice now seeming normally proportioned rather than overwhelmingly deep. Larger, you reply, then realize the inadequacy of the word. You don't just feel physically larger, you feel psychologically expanded, culturally enhanced, capable of relating to the world from perspectives that were completely inaccessible before the transformation. The Scale Keeper shows you your reflection in a polished crystal surface, and you barely recognize yourself. Not just because you're taller, but because your entire presence seems different. Your posture, your facial expressions, even the way you hold your hands, everything suggests someone who relates to space and scale in fundamentally different ways. This is approximately what humans were like before the Great Diminishing began affecting your species, she explains. Your ancestors had this kind of physical and psychological capacity. This is what the Memory Project made your people forget they had lost. The implications hit you like a physical force. Every human in your village, everyone in the surface world has been living with diminishment damage that has limited not just their physical development, but their cognitive and cultural capacity. The small-scale thinking, the limited architectural ambitions, the reduced social projects, all symptoms of a species that has forgotten how to operate at the scales it was designed for. But you also understand now why the Memory Project seemed necessary to your ancestors. Living with the knowledge of this diminishment, with the constant awareness of reduced capacity, would have been psychologically devastating. It was easier to forget what they had lost than to live with the daily awareness of operating at diminished capacity. Can this be reversed for entire populations, you ask, though you suspect the answer is complicated? Potentially, the Scalekeeper replies, but it would require massive social changes. Communities would have to completely restructure themselves for larger people with expanded cognitive capacity. Architecture, social systems, cultural practices, everything would need to be rebuilt. More challenging, she explains. Populations undergoing scale restoration would need extensive support during the transition period. Not everyone responds well to sudden expansion of physical and psychological capacity. Some individuals become overwhelmed by the enhanced cognitive abilities. Others struggle to maintain stable identity while experiencing such fundamental changes. That's why contact with the surface world is so important, Corvain adds. We can't restore entire human populations to pre-diminishment capacity all at once. But if we can establish ongoing relationships between restored individuals and current human communities, we can begin the process gradually, with proper support systems. You're beginning to understand the scope of what the giants in the deep places have been preparing for. Not just contact with the surface world, but a carefully planned process of helping human communities recover from centuries of diminishment damage. Physical restoration, psychological expansion, and cultural rebuilding that could eventually heal the rift that the Great Diminishing created. But it won't be simple or quick. Communities that have adapted to diminished scales would resist changes that challenge their established ways of life. Individuals would fear transformation processes that seem to threaten their current identity. Political and social structures would need to be rebuilt to accommodate people with expanded capacities. This is why we needed someone from the surface world to undergo the process, the Scalekeeper tells you. Someone who can return to human communities and demonstrate that scale restoration is possible, beneficial, and safe. Someone who can bridge the gap between what humans are now and what they could become again. As you adjust to your expanded physical and psychological capacity, you realize that your role has fundamentally changed. You're no longer just someone who discovered the truth about giants. You've become living proof that the diminishment damage affecting human communities can be reversed. But you've also become something that doesn't quite fit in either world. Too large for normal human communities, but still smaller than most giants. Your perspective now includes scales of experience that your original community can't relate to, but you haven't lost the ability to understand and communicate with people operating at diminished capacity. You're a bridge between worlds, carrying the possibility of healing a rupture that has affected everyone involved. The journey back to the surface world takes on entirely different meaning when you experience it from your restored scale. The passages that seemed cramped and difficult during your descent now feel appropriately proportioned. Your expanded cognitive capacity allows you to notice details in the giant architecture that were completely invisible before. Subtle engineering solutions, artistic elements integrated into functional design, cultural references embedded in structural choices. But it's your psychological relationship to the journey that has changed most dramatically. Instead of feeling like an explorer venturing into alien territory, you now feel like someone returning home after a long absence. The deep places don't seem foreign anymore. They feel like the natural environment for beings with your expanded capacity. Vera and Marcus, waiting for you in the High Valley community, react to your transformation with a mixture of satisfaction and concern. They've been hoping for successful contact with the giants, but seeing you return obviously challenges their assumptions about what that contact would mean. "You're different," Vera says, studying your face with the careful attention of someone trying to identify exactly what has shifted. Not just larger. You move differently, think differently. Your whole presence suggests someone operating from a different scale of experience. She's right. The scale restoration has changed more than your physical proportions. You relate to space, time, and social interactions from perspectives that include much larger frames of reference. Conversations that would have seemed important before now feel limited in scope. Problems that would have seemed overwhelming now appear manageable within longer-term strategies. But you haven't lost your ability to understand and empathize with people operating at diminished capacity. If anything, your expanded perspective allows you to see more clearly how diminishment has affected human communities, what specific capabilities have been lost, and what kinds of support would be needed to help people recover. Marcus shows you preparations the High Valley community has made based on messages from the deep places, expanded living spaces designed to accommodate larger individuals, modified workshops equipped for people with enhanced strength and reach. Most importantly, psychological support systems for community members who might choose to undergo scale restoration themselves. "We want to be ready," he explains, "when contact between the surface world and the giants becomes more regular. We want to serve as a transition community, helping people adjust to expanded capacities before they return to their original communities." The High Valley settlement has been developing protocols for gradual scale restoration, processes that allow individuals to expand their physical and psychological capacity slowly, with community support, rather than undergoing the rapid transformation you experienced in the deep places. But they've also been planning for the challenges that restored individuals will face when they return to diminished communities. How do you reintegrate into a society when your cognitive capacity and cultural perspectives have expanded beyond what that society can relate to? How do you communicate insights that require expanded consciousness to understand? That's your role now, Vera tells you. You're the first person to successfully bridge the gap between diminished and restored capacity. You can help us understand how to make the transition easier for others, how to support people through the adjustment process, and how to prepare surface communities for contact with restored individuals. The 3-day journey down from the High Valley to your original village gives you time to develop strategies for reintegration. You practice explaining concepts that require expanded consciousness in terms that diminished individuals can understand. You work on moderating your enhanced physical presence so that you don't overwhelm people who aren't accustomed to interacting with larger beings. Most importantly, you prepare yourself psychologically for returning to a community that will seem smaller in every sense, not just physically, but intellectually, culturally, and socially. Your expanded capacity allows you to see limitations in your original community that you were completely unconscious of before the restoration. But as you approach the familiar boundaries of your village, you realize that your enhanced perspective also allows you to see your community's strengths more clearly. The adaptability that allowed your ancestors to survive the Great Diminishing, the resilience that carried them through the Memory Project, the cultural cohesion that has maintained community life across centuries of gradual diminishment. Your people aren't just victims of cosmic forces beyond their control. They're survivors who have maintained human civilization under conditions that could have destroyed less adaptable societies. Your return to the village creates exactly the kind of disruption you expected. People who have known you your entire life struggle to recognize you in your enlarged form. Your changed physical presence combined with your obviously expanded psychological capacity makes everyone uncomfortable in ways they can't quite articulate. But you're prepared for this. You've developed approaches for helping people adjust to your transformation gradually, explaining the changes in terms that don't threaten their current worldview, while still opening possibilities for expanded understanding. The village council meeting call to discuss your return becomes the first test of your ability to serve as a bridge between worlds. You have to explain where you've been, what you've discovered, and what the implications might be for your community, all while avoiding information that would overwhelm people operating at diminished capacity. I found the people who remembered the old stories, you tell them, which is true without being more than they can handle. People who preserved knowledge about the time when our communities were connected to larger possibilities. You show them some of the tools and artifacts you brought back from the deep places, items scaled for beings larger than current humans, but not so large as to be completely incomprehensible. Evidence that sophisticated communities of larger people exist, without requiring immediate acceptance of the full reality of giant civilization. The response is mixed. Some community members are fascinated by the possibilities your discoveries suggest. Others are frightened by implications they can't quite grasp, but sense might threaten their current way of life. But everyone recognizes that your transformation represents something significant. Even people who don't understand what has happened to you can see that you've gained capabilities that could benefit the entire community. Can others undergo this expansion? The council leader asks, clearly struggling with concepts that don't quite fit his current framework of understanding. Yes, you reply, but it requires careful preparation and ongoing support, and it's not right for everyone. Some people are better suited to gradual change, others to more rapid transformation. Most importantly, anyone who chooses expansion needs to understand that they'll be changed in ways that affect how they relate to everything in their current life. You outline the protocols that the High Valley community has developed for supporting people through scale restoration. Preparation processes that help individuals develop the psychological flexibility needed for expanded capacity. Transition support that helps people integrate their changes without losing connection to their original community. Most importantly, ongoing relationships with restored individuals who can serve as guides and mentors. The village council agrees to establish contact with the High Valley community, allowing individuals who are interested in exploring expansion possibilities to visit and learn more about the process. Not a commitment to mass-scale restoration, but an opening for people who feel called to explore larger possibilities. As the meeting concludes and community members disperse to process what they've learned, you realize that you've successfully completed the first phase of your role as a bridge between worlds. You've returned to your original community with evidence that expanded possibilities exist, without overwhelming people with more than they can currently handle. But this is just the beginning. Your real work, helping individuals and communities navigate the gradual process of recovering from centuries of diminishment damage, is just starting. Standing in the village square where you played as a child, now viewing it from your expanded perspective while maintaining connection to the community that shaped you, you understand that healing the rift between diminished and restored capacity will require patience, wisdom, and careful attention to what each individual and community is ready to receive. You're no longer fully human as your original community understands humanity, but you haven't lost your essential connection to human experience. You've become something new, a bridge between what people are now and what they could become again, if they choose to recover the capacities that the Great Diminishing took from them. 6 months after your return, your village has become something unprecedented in the post-diminishing world, a community consciously integrating individuals of different scales. 3 other villages have undergone gradual restoration processes with support from the High Valley community, and 2 families have relocated from the mountain settlement to help with the integration process. The changes are remarkable and subtle. Architecture that seemed permanent and fixed has been modified to accommodate people of various sizes. Doorways have been enlarged where possible, or supplemented with additional entrances scaled for different users. Furniture workshops now produce items sized for multiple scales of inhabitants. Most remarkably, social spaces have been redesigned to allow comfortable interaction between people of different physical proportions. But the architectural changes are less significant than the psychological and cultural shifts. Your community has had to develop new social protocols for interaction between individuals with different cognitive capacities. Restored individuals don't just think differently, they process information faster, work with longer time horizons, and can handle more complex problem-solving tasks simultaneously. Rather than creating hierarchy based on enhanced capacity, your community has developed collaboration systems that take advantage of different cognitive strengths. Restored individuals excel at long-term planning, complex project coordination, and problems requiring large-scale thinking. Diminished individuals bring advantages in detail work, rapid adaptation to changing circumstances, and social cohesion that comes from shared historical experience. The integration has created a community culture that none of its members could have imagined before contact with the giants was re-established. Projects that would have been impossible for either diminished or restored individuals alone become manageable through collaborative approaches that utilize different scales of capability. Your role as the first bridge between worlds has evolved into something like a cultural translator. You help restored individuals communicate insights that require expanded consciousness in terms that diminished individuals can understand and work with. You help diminished individuals express concerns and needs in ways that restored individuals can appreciate despite their expanded perspectives. But the most important aspect of your role has become helping people navigate the choice about whether to undergo restoration themselves. Not everyone is suited for the psychological expansion that accompanies physical growth. Some people thrive with enhanced cognitive capacity, while others become overwhelmed by the increased complexity of expanded consciousness. You've developed assessment techniques that help individuals understand whether restoration would benefit them personally and would fit with their life goals and psychological temperament. Some people are clearly ready for the challenge of expanded capacity. Others would benefit more from remaining at their current scale while working collaboratively with restored individuals. The choice has become a genuine choice rather than an obligation or expectation, which has eliminated much of the anxiety that initially surrounded the restoration option. Your village has also become a research site for the giants in the deep places. Corvain and other researchers make regular visits to study how mixed-scale communities function, what challenges arise during integration, and what kinds of support systems work best for maintaining social cohesion across different levels of capacity. The research has implications far beyond your single community. The giants are using information from your integration experience to refine protocols for establishing contact with other surface communities, for supporting large-scale restoration projects, and for rebuilding the kind of integrated giant human societies that existed before the Great Diminishing. But perhaps the most significant development has been the contact your community has established with other communities that are beginning their own integration processes. A network of mixed-scale settlements is emerging, connected by trade relationships, shared knowledge, and cultural exchange that didn't exist in either the fully diminished or the fully giant worlds. The network includes communities that have chosen different approaches to dealing with the restoration option. Some have embraced large-scale restoration programs, creating settlements that are predominantly enlarged individuals with diminished minorities. Others have remained primarily diminished while establishing collaborative relationships with restored communities. Still others, like yours, have developed true integration models where different scales of individuals work together as equals. Each approach has advantages and challenges, but the network allows communities to share solutions, support each other through difficult transitions, and maintain cultural connections that prevent any single settlement from becoming isolated in its chosen approach to the restoration option. You've become an ambassador within this network, helping communities learn from each other's experiences and adapt successful integration techniques to their particular circumstances and cultural preferences. But the work has also brought you into contact with communities that have rejected the restoration option entirely, choosing to maintain their diminished status and avoid contact with enlarged individuals or giant societies. These communities present different challenges for the network, requiring diplomatic approaches that respect their choice, while keeping communication channels open for future reconsideration. Some of the rejection communities are motivated by fear of change, others by philosophical commitment to remaining within their current scale of experience, and others by cultural or religious beliefs that frame the diminishment as natural or desirable, rather than as damage to be repaired. Working with rejection communities has taught you that successful integration cannot be imposed from outside. Communities and individuals must choose expansion from internal motivation, supported by but not pressured by external examples and opportunities. Your role has expanded to include advocacy for the right of communities to choose their own relationship to the restoration option, even when those choices seem limiting from your expanded perspective. The network functions best when it includes communities that have made different choices, allowing individuals to find the scale of experience that best fits their personal needs and cultural preferences. Standing in your village square on the anniversary of your return from the deep places, you can see evidence of how much has changed and how much has remained constant. The physical modifications are obvious: enlarged doorways, mixed-scale furniture, architectural features designed for various sizes of users. But the social and cultural changes are more profound. Your community has learned to value difference rather than demanding uniformity. People of various scales work together not despite their differences, but because of the advantages that different perspectives and capabilities bring to collaborative projects. Most importantly, the community has developed cultural mechanisms for supporting individuals through major transitions, while maintaining social cohesion across changes that would have been impossible to navigate in the old, purely diminished world. But you also recognise that your community's successful integration represents just the first small step in healing the rift that the Great Diminishing created. Thousands of communities remain completely unaware that restoration options exist. The network of mixed-scale settlements includes only a tiny fraction of the surface world's population. Most importantly, the deep-placed giants remain isolated from surface contact, except through carefully managed diplomatic relationships. Your personal transformation from diminished human to bridge between worlds has shown that healing the Great Diminishing's effect is possible. Your community's successful integration has demonstrated that mixed-scale societies can function effectively and provide advantages that neither diminished nor enlarged communities can achieve alone. But the real work, expanding these possibilities to regional, national, and eventually global scales, remains ahead. You've become proof that a different kind of world is possible, where giants and humans and everyone in between can work together as partners, rather than as separated populations dealing with mutual incomprehension. The deep places still hold giants who remember what the world was like before the diminishing began. The surface world still contains millions of people living with diminishment damage they don't even recognise. Between them, communities like yours are learning to build bridges that could eventually reconnect two parts of the world that have been artificially separated for far too long. Your journey into the deep places taught you that giants never really disappeared. They were waiting, preparing, hoping for the day when surface dwellers would remember how to find them. That day has arrived, and you've become living proof that the gap between worlds can be bridged, that ancient friendships can be restored, and that the world can once again be large enough for magnificence of every scale. 2 years after your transformation, you're standing on a hilltop overlooking the Convergence Valley, where representatives from 47 mixed-scale communities have gathered for the first Interscale Alliance Congress. The sight below you would have been impossible to imagine before contact with the deep places was re-established. Beings of every size, from standard human height to nearly giant scale, move through an encampment designed to accommodate radical differences in physical proportion. Tents range from standard human shelters to pavilions large enough to house your entire original village. Meeting areas feature multi-level seating arrangements that allow comfortable interaction between individuals whose eye heights vary by 10 feet or more. But the most remarkable aspect of the gathering isn't the logistics of mixed-scale accommodation. It's the sophistication of the collaborative relationships that have developed between communities that have chosen different approaches to restoration. You're serving as a coordination facilitator, helping to manage communication between groups whose cognitive processing operates at different speeds and scales. Restored individuals tend to think in longer time horizons and can handle more complex multivariable problems simultaneously. Diminished individuals excel at rapid adaptation and social cohesion. Communities that have achieved successful integration bring collaboration techniques that neither restored nor diminished communities could develop alone. The Congress agenda reflects this diversity of capabilities and perspectives. Issues are approached through parallel processing systems that take advantage of different cognitive strengths. Long-term strategic planning is handled primarily by restored individuals with input from integration communities. Immediate implementation details are managed by diminished individuals with oversight from restored coordinators. Cultural and social integration. Challenges are addressed by mixed-scale communities with consultation from both purely restored and purely diminished settlements. But the most significant development is the emergence of communication protocols that allow effective coordination across cognitive differences. Communities have developed translation techniques that allow insights requiring expanded consciousness to be expressed in terms that diminished individuals can work with productively. Similarly, concerns and perspectives that emerge from diminished experience can be communicated in ways that restored individuals can integrate into their expanded analytical frameworks. The result is collaborative capability that exceeds what any single community could achieve alone. Projects that would be impossible for diminished communities due to scale limitations, and impractical for restored communities due to detail complexity, become manageable through alliance coordination systems. You've been working with a research team that includes individuals from all scales of experience, studying the alliance networks that have emerged over the past 2 years. The findings challenge assumptions about community development and intergroup cooperation. Mixed-scale networks, it turns out, are more resilient and adaptable than communities based on single scales of experience. When challenges arise that exceed the capability of one scale of community, alliance relationships allow rapid mobilization of different types of expertise and resources. Restored communities excel at coordinating large-scale responses to regional challenges. Diminished communities provide rapid local adaptation and implementation. Integration communities serve as bridges that maintain communication and cultural continuity across different approaches. But the research has also revealed unexpected challenges. Alliance coordination requires constant attention to maintaining balance between different scales of contribution. Restored individuals can easily overwhelm alliance discussions with cognitive capacity that diminished individuals can't match. Diminished individuals can become marginalized in planning processes that operate beyond their analytical scope. Successful alliance systems have developed rotation protocols that ensure leadership and decision-making responsibilities move regularly between individuals of different scales. This prevents any single cognitive level from dominating alliance processes, while ensuring that different types of expertise are utilized appropriately. The Congress includes presentations from communities that have pioneered innovative approaches to these challenges. One settlement has developed mentor pairing systems that match restored individuals with diminished partners for all major projects, ensuring that expanded cognitive capacity is always grounded in detailed practical understanding. Another community has created parallel track systems where problems are analysed simultaneously by different scales of cognitive capability, with solutions emerging through synthesis rather than dominance. But the most remarkable presentation comes from a community that has achieved something unprecedented: voluntary reversible restoration. Working with advanced techniques developed by the Deep Place giants, they've learned to adjust individual scale capacity temporarily, allowing people to experience different cognitive levels as needed for specific projects or life phases. The implications are staggering. Instead of making permanent choices about scale capacity, individuals could potentially move fluidly between different levels of physical and cognitive capability as circumstances require. Families could adjust their scale together for specific life phases. Communities could modify their demographic composition to match changing challenges or opportunities. We're not there yet, the presentation leader explains, but we think we're developing towards something like optimal scale flexibility, the ability to be the size and cognitive capacity that best serves individual fulfillment and community needs, rather than being locked into whatever scale accidents of birth or restoration timing have determined. The Congress also includes presentations from the Deep Place research teams, sharing the latest findings about the Great Diminishing's causes and potential remediation. The news is both encouraging and sobering. The giants have confirmed that the diminishing was caused by cosmic scale events that disrupted fundamental forces determining size and growth in living systems. But they've also confirmed that the disruption is gradually weakening, suggesting that natural recovery might be possible over geological timescales. More importantly, they've identified techniques that could accelerate natural recovery processes. Large-scale restoration projects, coordinated across multiple communities and regions, could potentially restore the world's capacity for supporting giant-scale beings within a few generations rather than millennia. But such projects would require unprecedented cooperation between surface communities, deep-placed giants, and the high-valley transition settlements. The logistics alone would challenge the coordination capability of any previously existing alliance system. Which brings the Congress to its central purpose, establishing formal diplomatic and coordination relationships between the surface world and the giant communities in the deep places. Representatives from Underholm and other deep place settlements have made the journey to surface levels for the first time in centuries. Their presence at the Congress represents the most significant interscale diplomatic event since the Great Diminishing began. The negotiations are complex, involving communities with very different perspectives on time, scale, and social organisation. Giants think in terms of centuries and organise around projects that span multiple human generations. Surface communities operate with shorter time horizons and more flexible social structures. Integration communities bridge some of these differences, but can't fully translate between worldviews, separated by centuries of independent development. But the negotiations are successful in establishing framework agreements for ongoing cooperation. Formal diplomatic protocols for communication between surface and deep place communities, trade relationships that allow exchange of resources and knowledge between settlements that have developed different specializations. Most importantly, coordinated research programs aimed at understanding and potentially reversing the Great Diminishing itself. You find yourself appointed as one of the permanent liaison coordinators, responsible for maintaining communication between the Surface Alliance network and the deep place research communities. It's a role that requires constant travel between surface settlements, high-valley transition communities, and deep-placed giant cities, serving as a living bridge between worlds that are learning to reconnect after centuries of separation. But the most profound aspect of your work has become helping communities and individuals navigate the question of whether large-scale restoration projects are desirable. The technical capability exists to begin healing the Great Diminishing's effects on a regional scale, but such projects would fundamentally change the world, creating conditions that would support giant-scale beings and potentially make diminished-scale existence difficult or impossible. Should communities that have successfully adapted to diminished-scale existence be asked to participate in changes that would make their current way of life obsolete? Should individuals who are comfortable with their diminished capacity be encouraged to undergo restoration processes that might not improve their personal satisfaction or social functionality? The Congress establishes working groups to study these questions, but the answers will emerge through ongoing dialogue between communities with very different perspectives on what constitutes optimal human development and social organisation. As the Congress concludes, and representatives prepare to return to their home communities, you realise that you've participated in the beginning of something unprecedented in post-diminishing history. Voluntary cooperation between communities of radically different scales, aimed at healing ancient wounds while respecting different approaches to human development and social organisation. The networks that have emerged through 2 years of alliance building represent more than diplomatic relationships. They represent proof that the Great Diminishing's social and cultural effects can be overcome through collaboration, that communities separated by cognitive and physical differences can work together as partners rather than competitors or strangers, but they also represent just the beginning of challenges that will require generations to fully address. Healing the Great Diminishing completely would require changes that affect every aspect of human civilization. The alliance networks that have proven successful at community and regional scales will need to expand to continental and eventually global cooperation. You've become part of the foundation for that expansion, but you also recognise that your role as a bridge between worlds is evolving towards something larger, helping to build the cultural and diplomatic infrastructure that could eventually support a fully integrated world where beings of all scales can thrive together. 5 years after your first journey into the deep places, you're participating in something that hasn't existed since before the Great Diminishing began. A formal council that includes representatives from every known scale of intelligent being. The Council of Scales convenes in a specially constructed amphitheatre that accommodates beings from 4-foot diminished humans to 18-foot deep-placed giants, with architectural features designed for every size in between. Your role has evolved beyond bridge building between communities to serving as one of the 7 scale coordinators. individuals whose restoration experience and diplomatic work qualifies them to facilitate communication between beings whose cognitive and cultural differences have grown dramatic over centuries of separate development. The Council's central mandate is addressing a crisis that has emerged from the success of restoration networks. Population pressure in communities that have achieved large-scale restoration. As more individuals undergo scale expansion, their resource requirements increase proportionally. Housing, food production, tool manufacturing, and energy consumption all scale up with physical size, creating sustainability challenges that threaten the viability of restoration programs. But the crisis has also revealed opportunities that no single-scale community could have identified or acted upon. Collaborative projects between different scales of beings can achieve efficiency and capability advantages that offset the resource costs of supporting larger populations. The Council sessions you're facilitating focus on coordinating resource-sharing agreements between communities that have different scale advantages. Giants excel at projects requiring massive physical capability, mining, large-scale construction, geological modification, and environmental engineering that shapes landscapes rather than just adapting to them. Diminished humans excel at precision work, detail manufacturing, complex system maintenance, and social coordination that requires rapid response to changing circumstances. Integration communities have developed techniques for combining these capabilities into collaborative projects that achieve results impossible for any single scale acting alone. Architectural projects that require both massive structural engineering and intricate detail work. Manufacturing systems that combine giant-scale raw material processing with precision finishing and quality control. Agricultural programs that integrate large-scale land modification with careful cultivation techniques. But the most ambitious council project involves something unprecedented: coordinated restoration of an entire bioregion to pre-diminishing ecological conditions. The target area is a valley system that contains evidence of extensive giant presence before the diminishing began. Archaeological research has revealed sophisticated ecological management systems that supported both giant communities and complex ecosystems designed around the presence of very large beings. The restoration project would involve re-establishing those ecological relationships, reintroducing plant and animal species that co-evolved with giants, rebuilding geological features that supported giant-scale communities, and most ambitiously, creating conditions that would allow natural restoration of giant-scale growth in living systems. The project represents the first attempt to reverse great diminishing effects on an ecosystem scale rather than just individual restoration. Success would prove that the cosmic forces that caused the diminishing can be countered through coordinated intervention, opening possibilities for regional and eventually continental restoration programs. But the project also represents the first major test of interscale cooperation on a timeline that challenges the collaborative capabilities of communities with very different planning horizons and decision-making processes. Giants think in terms of centuries and can commit to project phases that span multiple human generations. Human communities operate with shorter time horizons and need to see intermediate results to maintain political and social support for long-term commitments. Integration communities bridge some of these differences, but can't fully resolve the temporal coordination challenges. Your role involves developing communication protocols that allow effective project planning across these temporal differences. Giants contribute strategic planning and long-term resource coordination. Diminished humans handle implementation details and short-term adaptation requirements. Integration communities provide continuity management that maintains project coherence across changes in leadership, technology, and social conditions. The Council sessions reveal both the potential and the complexity of large-scale interscale cooperation. When different scales of capability work together effectively, the results exceed what any single community could achieve. Analytical problems that overwhelm diminished cognitive capacity become manageable when supported by enlarged analytical frameworks. Projects that exceed giant attention to detail become feasible when supported by human precision capabilities. But coordination itself requires resources and expertise that challenge even the most successful integration communities. Every decision needs to be communicated across cognitive differences. Every implementation phase needs to account for different physical capabilities. Every timeline needs to balance different temporal perspectives. the Council has developed rotating leadership systems that ensure different scales of beings take primary responsibility for different project phases. Long-term strategic planning is coordinated by giants with input from integration communities. Medium-term tactical planning is managed by integration communities with consultation from both giants and diminished humans. Short-term implementation is handled by diminished humans with oversight from restored coordinators. But the most innovative development is the emergence of projects designed specifically for mixed-scale teams, where success depends on integrating different scales of capability rather than simply coordinating separate contributions. One such project involves developing communication technologies that maintain effectiveness across the range of scales represented in the Council. Current communication systems work well within single-scale communities, but break down when used between beings with significantly different physical and cognitive capabilities. The solution requires integration of giant-scale engineering capability, human-scale precision manufacturing, and integration community social coordination. Giants provide the theoretical framework and large-scale component development. Humans handle the precision work and user interface design. Integration communities manage the social and cultural aspects of implementing new communication systems across diverse communities. Another mixed-scale project focuses on developing educational systems that can serve individuals undergoing restoration processes. Current educational approaches work well for stable-scale populations, but can't accommodate individuals whose cognitive capacity is changing rapidly during restoration. The solution involves curriculum design that scales with developing capability, taught by teams that include individuals at various scales of development, in facilities designed to accommodate students whose physical size may change significantly during their educational programs. But the most ambitious mixed-scale project involves something that challenges fundamental assumptions about the relationship between scale and identity: the development of technologies that allow temporary scale adjustment for specific purposes. Building on research pioneered by individual communities, the Council is coordinating development of techniques that would allow individuals to temporarily adjust their scale up or down as circumstances require. Someone might spend most of their life at human scale, but temporarily enlarge for projects requiring giant capability, or temporarily diminish for work requiring precision beyond their normal capacity. The implications are profound. Instead of making permanent choices about scale identity, individuals could potentially optimize their physical and cognitive capabilities for specific life phases, career requirements, or social contributions. Communities could adjust their demographic composition to match changing challenges without requiring permanent migration or settlement changes. The technology is still experimental and involves risks that aren't fully understood. Temporary scale changes put stress on biological systems that may have long-term consequences. Psychological integration of multiple scale identities challenges individual coherence in ways that current therapeutic approaches can't fully address. But successful development would represent the ultimate healing of great diminishing effects, restoration of natural scale flexibility that allows beings to achieve optimal size for their circumstances rather than being constrained by the accidents of birth, restoration timing, or historical diminishment damage. Your work with the Council has brought you into contact with research that suggests the Great Diminishing itself may have been an evolutionary pressure that ultimately leads to greater scale flexibility. Communities that successfully adapt to diminishment develop technologies and social systems that support multiple scales simultaneously. Integration of those technologies with giant-scale capabilities produces possibilities that neither diminished nor giant communities could achieve alone. The Council of Scales represents more than diplomatic cooperation between different sizes of beings. It represents the emergence of genuinely post-diminishing civilization, social organization that treats scale as a flexible capability rather than a fixed constraint, technology that serves beings across the full range of possible sizes, and cultural frameworks that celebrate scale diversity rather than demanding uniformity. But you also recognize that the Council's work affects only a tiny fraction of the world's population. Most communities remain unaware that restoration options exist. Most individuals live with diminishment damage they don't recognize. Most importantly, the social and cultural changes that would be required for widespread scale integration challenge every existing political, economic, and cultural system. the Council's success in coordinating inter-scale cooperation on specific projects proves that such cooperation is possible, but extending those successes to regional, national and global scales would require changes that transform every aspect of human civilization. As the current Council session concludes, and representatives prepare for the implementation phase of the bioregion restoration project, you understand that you're participating in the early stages of changes that could eventually affect everyone on the planet. The question is whether those changes will happen through gradual expansion of successful models like the Council, or whether they'll require more dramatic intervention that forces unprepared communities to adapt to scales of existence they haven't chosen and may not be ready to handle. 10 years after your transformation, you're standing before the Global Assembly, a gathering that includes representatives from every inhabited continent, addressing the question of whether to implement worldwide restoration of pre-diminishing conditions. The amphitheatre that houses the Assembly has been carved from an entire mountainside, with architectural features designed to accommodate the full range of beings that now participate in interscale civilization. Your role has evolved to Senior Coordinator for Global Integration, making you one of the primary interfaces between the restored giant communities and the billions of humans who still live with diminishment damage they don't fully understand. The decade of gradual expansion from community to regional to continental cooperation has culminated in this moment, humanity collectively deciding its relationship to the Great Diminishing and the possibilities for healing its effects. The Assembly includes representatives from integration communities that have successfully adapted to mixed-scale existence, deep-placed giants who have maintained pre-diminishing capabilities, and most significantly, delegates from communities that have chosen to remain at diminished scale and avoid restoration programs. The diversity of perspectives is staggering. Some communities have embraced large-scale restoration and now include individuals up to 15 feet tall with correspondingly expanded cognitive capacity. Others have remained completely diminished, maintaining traditional human scale while benefiting from alliance relationships with restored communities. Many have developed integration approaches that include individuals at various scales working together as equals. But the most remarkable development is the emergence of communities that have achieved genuine scale flexibility. Using technologies developed through Council of Scales research programs, these settlements include individuals who regularly adjust their scale to match project requirements, social roles, or personal development goals. The Assembly's central question isn't whether global restoration is technically possible. The past decade has proven that the Great Diminishing's effects can be reversed through coordinated intervention. The question is whether global restoration is socially, culturally, and ethically desirable. The debate reveals fault lines that cut across every aspect of human civilization. Economic systems designed around current scales of production and consumption would need complete reconstruction to accommodate larger humans with proportionally greater resource requirements. Political structures based on current cognitive capacity would need fundamental revision to include individuals with expanded analytical capabilities. Cultural frameworks that define human identity around current physical and psychological limitations would need to embrace radically expanded definitions of human potential. But the debate also reveals possibilities that wouldn't exist without the restoration option. Economic systems that integrate multiple scales of capability could achieve productivity and sustainability advantages impossible for single-scale economies. Political structures that include expanded cognitive capacity could address complex challenges that overwhelm current decision-making systems. Cultural frameworks that celebrate scale diversity could support individual development and social organization more effectively than systems based on enforced uniformity. Your presentations to the Assembly focus on lessons learned from successful integration communities. The evidence shows that mixed-scale societies consistently outperform single-scale communities across measures of economic productivity, social satisfaction, cultural innovation, and environmental sustainability. But the evidence also shows that successful integration requires careful preparation, ongoing support systems, and commitment to collaboration rather than hierarchy. Communities that attempt rapid integration without adequate preparation experience social disruption, economic instability, and cultural conflict that can destroy community cohesion. The Assembly includes testimony from individuals who have chosen different approaches to the restoration option. Restored individuals describe the expanded capabilities, enhanced perspective, and increased life satisfaction they've experienced through scale expansion. They also acknowledge the challenges of maintaining relationships with diminished communities and the psychological adjustments required for operating at enlarged capacity. Diminished individuals who have chosen to remain at traditional human scale describe the advantages of maintaining familiar cognitive and physical frameworks, while benefiting from alliance relationships with restored communities. They also express concerns about being overwhelmed or marginalized in a world increasingly adapted to larger scales of existence. Integration community members describe the advantages of living in mixed-scale societies, while acknowledging the complexity and resource requirements of maintaining successful scale diversity. Most importantly, they provide evidence that successful integration enhances everyone involved, rather than creating hierarchy based on scale differences. But the most compelling testimony comes from individuals who have experienced scale flexibility through temporary adjustment technologies. They describe the profound expansion of perspective and capability that comes from experiencing existence at multiple scales, while also acknowledging the psychological challenges of maintaining coherent identity across different scales of experience. The Assembly's working groups have spent months developing implementation scenarios for different approaches to global restoration. The scenarios range from complete restoration that would make the entire world capable of supporting giant-scale beings, to selective restoration that would create restoration zones while maintaining diminished regions, to flexible restoration that would provide scale adjustment opportunities without requiring permanent choices about scale identity. Each scenario has advantages and disadvantages that affect different communities differently. Complete restoration would maximize the advantages of enlarged capability, but would require everyone to adapt to changes they haven't chosen. Selective restoration would allow community choice, but would create boundaries between regions that could lead to separation and conflict. Flexible restoration would provide maximum individual choice, but would require technologies and social systems that don't yet exist at global scale. The Assembly's decision-making process itself represents an innovation in interscale cooperation. Voting procedures account for different cognitive processing speeds and analytical capabilities. Discussion protocols ensure that perspectives from all scales receive appropriate consideration. Most importantly, consensus-building techniques integrate different approaches to problem-solving and decision-making rather than simply aggregating individual preferences. After months of deliberation, the Assembly reaches a decision that reflects the complexity of the issues involved. Phased implementation of flexible restoration options, beginning with regions that have demonstrated successful integration and expanding based on community readiness and individual choice. The decision establishes global infrastructure for supporting scale flexibility while respecting community autonomy regarding restoration participation. Research and development programs will continue improving restoration technologies and integration techniques. Educational systems will provide information about restoration options without pressuring participation. Most importantly, support systems will ensure that individuals and communities can make genuinely free choices about their relationship to scale expansion. The implementation timeline spans multiple generations, allowing for gradual adaptation rather than disruptive change. Communities that are ready for integration can access restoration options immediately. Communities that need more preparation time can participate in educational and cultural exchange programs while maintaining their current scale. Individuals within any community can pursue restoration options regardless of their community's collective choice, with support for maintaining relationships across scale differences. But the most significant aspect of the decision is its recognition that healing the Great Diminishing isn't just about reversing physical and cognitive limitations. It's about restoring humanity's relationship to magnificence, to the capacity for conceiving and achieving greatness that transcends individual limitations. The Assembly's final declaration states, "The Great Diminishing affected not just our physical size, but our ability to dream at giant scale, to collaborate across radical differences, to build civilizations worthy of the intelligence and creativity that exists within human consciousness." Restoration of scale flexibility represents restoration of human potential itself. As the Assembly concludes and representatives prepare to return to their communities, with news of the global decision, You realise that your personal journey from diminished human to bridge between worlds has culminated in something beyond what you could have imagined when you first discovered the Memory Project documents. The world is choosing to remember what it means to live in a universe large enough for giants. More than that, it's choosing to become a civilization that celebrates and integrates every scale of human potential, from the most diminished to the most magnificently enlarged. Your transformation from curious villager to senior coordinator for global integration represents just one example of what becomes possible when beings learn to think and collaborate across scales that seemed impossible to bridge. But the real transformation is happening in communities around the world, as individuals and groups discover that the limitations they accepted as permanent features of human existence were actually temporary effects of cosmic forces that can be healed through cooperation, commitment, and the courage to become larger than they previously thought possible. The Great Diminishing is ending, not through automatic reversal, but through conscious choice by beings who have remembered what it means to live magnificently. The deep places still hold giants who have waited centuries for this remembering. The surface world still contains billions of people ready to discover capabilities they never knew they possessed, and between them, communities like the ones you've helped build are proving that the world is large enough for magnificence of every scale, as long as beings of different sizes remember how to work together as partners in the great project of becoming everything they're capable of becoming. The giants never really disappeared. They were waiting in the deep places for humans to remember how to find them. That remembering is now spreading around the world, carried by individuals who have learned to think at giant scale, while maintaining connection to every size of human experience. The future belongs to beings who can be as large as their dreams require, as flexible as their circumstances demand, and as magnificent as their courage allows them to become.